The words were shouted into the dust like a curse that refused to die. They echoed across the dry Texas yard, carried by the wind that smelled of sweat, horses, and old regret. People laughed, some nervously, some cruelly, as if the sentence were a joke meant to ease the discomfort of what they were witnessing. But the cowboy who stood near the fence did not laugh. He flinched, the way a man does when something strikes too close to a wound he never admits he has. Ethan Cole had come to the town of Red Hollow to sell cattle, not to buy anything else. He was known as a quiet rancher, the kind who paid his debts on time and spoke more to his horses than to people. He had lost his wife 2 winters ago and had learned to move through the world with a careful distance, like a man carrying a cracked cup he didn't want anyone else to touch. When he heard the woman's voice, low and steady despite the humiliation in it, he turned before he could stop himself. She stood on a wooden platform, wrists bound loosely, dark hair braided with deliberate care as if dignity were the last thing no one could steal from her. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not begging, not pleading, but measuring, as if she were weighing souls instead of faces. She was Apache, that much was clear, and the sign nailed to the post beside her said for sale, worker. Strong. Obedient. Someone had added the crude words beneath in charcoal, mocking her humanity. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He told himself to look away. He told himself this was how the world worked out here, that one man couldn't undo the cruelty of a frontier built on broken backs. But his feet refused to move. He watched as men raised hands, calling out prices like they were bidding on a horse with a bad leg. Each shout felt like another stone dropped into his gut. The woman met his gaze then, and for a moment the noise faded. Her eyes were dark, steady, ancient. When she spoke again, it was softer, meant only for those close enough to hear. "Buy me, cowboy," she said, her voice trembling just enough to satisfy the crowd. "I will make sure you are satisfied." The men laughed louder at that, misunderstanding the price she was offering to pay. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew the satisfaction she meant had nothing to do with pleasure. It was survival. It was the desperate bargaining of a human being stripped of choices. He felt the familiar voice of fear rise in him, the one that warned him not to get involved, not to invite trouble into his already lonely life. But another voice, quieter and older, spoke too. It reminded him of his mother, who once told him that a man's worth was measured by what he did when no one forced him to do right. The auctioneer slammed his gavel against the post, calling for higher bids. Ethan raised his hand before he had time to think. The crowd turned, surprised, some amused. The price jumped. Ethan raised his hand again. His heart pounded, not from fear of losing money, but from the weight of what he was about to do. When the gavel finally fell, the yard went quiet. The auctioneer announced Ethan's name, and a few men muttered under their breath. The woman closed her eyes briefly, exhaling as if she had been holding her breath for days. When she looked at Ethan again, there was no gratitude yet, only caution. She had learned, perhaps too well, that ownership often came wrapped in false kindness. They cut her bonds and handed Ethan a paper that pretended legality. He took it without looking, his fingers stiff. As they walked away from the platform, the woman followed him at a careful distance, as though expecting a blow. Ethan led her to his wagon, helped her climb in without touching her, then climbed up himself, flicking the reins with a sharp snap. He did not speak, until the town had disappeared behind them. "My name is Ethan," he said finally, staring straight ahead. "You don't owe me anything." She studied him from the corner of her eye. "Men who say that usually mean the opposite," she replied. Her English was careful, practiced. "What do you want from me, cowboy?" Ethan swallowed. "I want you safe," he said. The words felt inadequate, small compared to the weight of the moment. "I want you free." She laughed once, a sound without humor. "Freedom is not something men buy," she said. "It is something they take." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll give you what I can," he said. "And you can decide the rest." They traveled in silence after that, the wheels creaking over the dirt road, the sky stretching wide above them. When they reached his ranch, the sun was dipping low, painting the land in golden shadow. Ethan helped her down from the wagon and pointed to a small cabin near the creek. "You can stay there," he said. "There's food inside, clothes. If you want to leave, there's a horse saddled. I won't stop you." She did not move. She watched him, searching for the trick. "Why?" she asked at last. "Why spend your money on someone you do not want?" Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly. Because I couldn't stand the idea of leaving you there, he said. And because I've lost enough to know what it feels like to be powerless. Her gaze softened, just a fraction. She nodded once and walked toward the cabin, her steps careful but steady. That night, Ethan sat on his porch long after the stars came out, listening to the creek and wondering if he had done the right thing. Days passed. The woman, who eventually told him her name was Naya, kept to herself at first. She accepted food but did not ask for anything else. Ethan respected her distance, working the ranch as he always had, though now he found himself glancing toward the cabin more often than he admitted. Slowly, trust grew, not as a sudden gift, but as something built from small, consistent acts. Naya began helping around the ranch of her own choosing, tending the garden, mending fences. She worked with quiet focus, her movements efficient and strong. One evening, as they shared a simple meal on the porch, she spoke of her people, of the mountains where she had grown up, of the songs her mother used to sing by the fire. Her voice carried both pride and sorrow, a reminder of what had been taken and what still lived inside her. Ethan listened, really listened, and felt something shift within him. He realized that satisfaction, the kind she had offered at the auction, was never about ownership or control. It was about restoring what had been broken, about choosing humanity when cruelty was easier. Trouble came, as it often does, in the form of men from Red Hollow who did not like seeing an Apache woman treated as anything other than property. They rode up one afternoon, dust swirling around their horses, demanding Ethan hand her over. Ethan stood his ground, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. Naya stepped forward then, standing beside him, not behind. "You will not take me," she said, her voice clear. "I am not for sale." Something in her certainty unsettled the men. They left with threats, but they did leave. That night, Naya thanked Ethan, not with words, but with a look that held respect, and perhaps something like hope. Weeks later, Naya told Ethan she was ready to go. Her people were north, and she wanted to find them, or at least the land that remembered them. Ethan saddled the horse for her, his heart heavy but his hands steady. "You're always welcome here," he said. She smiled, a real smile this time. "You bought me once," she said softly. "But you never owned me. That is why I will remember you." As she rode away, Ethan felt the ache of loss, but also a warmth he hadn't felt since before his wife's death. He realized then that compassion had saved them both. He had not rescued her, he had simply refused to abandon his humanity. And in doing so, he had found a piece of his own again. Long after Naya disappeared into the horizon, Ethan returned to his quiet life, changed in ways no one else could see. He understood now that the truest satisfaction came not from taking, but from giving, freely, without expectation. And somewhere beyond the plains, an Apache woman rode toward her future carrying the knowledge that kindness, once offered, can echo across a lifetime. The ranch felt too quiet after Naya left. Ethan noticed it first in the mornings. The creek still murmured, the cattle still lowed for feed, and the wind still combed the grass like invisible fingers, but something essential was missing. It was not her footsteps or her voice exactly. It was the sense that another heartbeat had been moving through the land, one that reminded him the world was larger than his grief. For the first few weeks, Ethan told himself this emptiness was temporary. People came and went, that was the nature of frontier life. He buried himself in work, rising before dawn and returning after sunset, his hands raw and his shoulders aching. At night, he sat on the porch and stared into the dark, replaying moments he hadn't realized would matter so much. The way Naya listened before speaking, the careful respect with which she touched the land, the quiet strength in her eyes. Sometimes, he wondered if he had imagined her. But then he would find proof she had been real. A repaired fence that had once leaned crooked, a patch of herbs growing near the creek she had planted without comment, a small symbol carved into the wood of the cabin door, an Apache mark for gratitude. Those signs reminded him that kindness leaves fingerprints, even after the hands are gone. Trouble did not forget Ethan Cole, however. Red Hollow had a long memory and a short temper. Word spread that the cowboy who had wasted good money on an Apache woman had let her walk free. Some called him foolish, others called him dangerous, a few called him worse. When cattle went missing from nearby ranches, fingers pointed quickly toward the quiet man who no longer bothered to explain himself. One evening, as the sky burned orange with sunset, Ethan found fresh tracks near his northern fence, bootprints, not his own. His jaw tightened. He checked his rifle, not with anger, but with a familiar heaviness. He had hoped compassion would be enough. Experience told him it rarely was. The riders came 2 nights later. They didn't announce themselves. They never did. Horses crept close, shadows moving against shadows, until Ethan stepped out onto the porch, lantern in hand. The light revealed 3 men, faces hard and familiar. One of them was the auctioneer from Red Hollow. "She was worth money," the man said flatly. "And you cost us that." Ethan stood tall, the lantern steady. "She wasn't yours," he replied. "And she's gone." The auctioneer's smile was thin. "People like you forget their place," he said. "This land was built on knowing who belongs where." Before Ethan could answer, a sound cut through the night, a low whistle, sharp and deliberate. The men froze. From the darkness beyond the creek came movement, silent and purposeful. Shapes emerged from the shadows, not charging, not shouting, simply appearing, as if the land itself had decided to stand up. The auctioneer's eyes widened. "Apache," he whispered. Naya stepped forward. She looked different, not weaker, not stronger, just whole. Her posture was relaxed but alert, her eyes calm in a way that unsettled men used to fear and force. Behind her stood others, men and women, faces painted with the quiet resolve of people who had survived worse than threats in the dark. Ethan felt his breath catch. "You came back," he said, disbelief and relief tangling in his chest. Naya glanced at him briefly, and in that glance was everything she didn't say. "The desert remembers kindness," she replied. "So do my people." The auctioneer sputtered, trying to regain control. "She's property," he insisted weakly. Naya's gaze returned to him, cold as winter stone. "I was never property," she said. "I was only surrounded by men who forgot they were human." The silence stretched. One of the riders shifted nervously. Another lowered his eyes. The balance of power had changed, not through violence, but through presence. The land, the people, the truth, it all stood against them. "Leave," Naya said, "and do not return." They did. When the dust settled, Ethan realized his hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something else. Gratitude. Awe. A sense of standing at the edge of something larger than himself. Later, as the fire crackled and the Apache group rested near the creek, Naya told her story. She had found survivors of her people scattered across the land, broken, weary, but alive. She told them of the cowboy who bought her freedom without asking for her soul. At first, they had doubted. Then they listened. And then they decided to come, not to fight, but to protect what had been done right. "You showed us something," Naya said quietly as they sat apart from the others. "That not all kindness comes with chains." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't do much." She smiled softly. "That is what men who do the most always say." By morning, the Apache group prepared to leave. They had their own journey, their own wounds to tend. Naya stood before Ethan one last time, the sunrise painting her silhouette in gold. "I said once that I would make sure you were satisfied," she said gently. "Now you know what I meant." Ethan understood then. Satisfaction was not possession. It was knowing that when the moment came, he had chosen compassion over comfort, humanity over fear. And that choice had rippled outward, touching lives he might never see again. Naya placed something in his hand, a small stone, etched with the same symbol she had carved into the cabin door. "So you remember," she said. As they rode away, Ethan watched until the land swallowed them whole. He felt no emptiness this time. Only peace. From that day on, Ethan Cole's ranch became known as a place of fairness. Travelers found food there. The lost found rest. And when people asked him why he lived the way he did, he would simply look toward the horizon and say, "Because once, someone reminded me what it means to be human." And the desert, vast and patient, kept the story alive, whispering it through wind and stone, carrying the truth that even in the harshest places, kindness can still take root, grow, and change the world.